It does not upset me if my daily routine is disturbed. I don't think Newt really has that much of a daily routine in the first place. Hello there, I'm Simon. Welcome to my channel. Today's topic is everyone's favorite Hufflepuff, Newton Artemis Fido Scamander. There is a theory doing the rounds online. Is that a thing people actually say? Well, it is now. That Newt has some form of autism. Now, a lot can be said about autism, which I'm not gonna say here. I'll probably make a whole video about it at some point anyway. But basically, autism is a spectrum, and there's probably about as many ways to be autistic as there are autistic people. So the theory is that Newt is on that spectrum. So that is what I'm looking into today. Now, according to the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, aka DSM-5, autism spectrum disorder is defined as persistent difficulties with social communication and social interaction, and restricted and repetitive patterns of behaviors, activities, or interests, including sensory behavior to the extent that it limits everyday functioning. You following? So what about Newt? Does this apply to him? Well, he's definitely not the stereotypical autistic person, which seems a bit contradictory, doesn't it? I mean, at first glance, he would seem to be exactly that, right? Well, no. Let me clarify. So when I say stereotypical autistic person, I just mean what I see as the stereotype. It may differ from what you have in your head as stereotype, and it certainly differs from reality, just to be clear. So to me, the stereotypical autistic person is someone who doesn't say much, is very bad at communicating, doesn't quite get social norms, is very passionate about one or two specific topics, and has a lot of knowledge about that topic. Is that true? It's complicated. But is it true for Newt? Well, in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, aka FBAWTFT, he's not actually that quiet. I mean, he's the main character, so it's kind of to be expected that he's gonna be saying a couple of things. But still, I don't get the impression that he's like staying quiet when he's supposed to be speaking or anything. In fact, he seems to be quite eloquent when you hear him explain stuff. Now, of course, most of that is exposition in its purest form, for the benefit of the viewer, so it has to be clear. But this is still the canonical Newt. Now, there are a couple of instances where Newt kinda just forgets to communicate something that is obvious to him, just not to the people with him. But then he quickly realizes and explains things. Pretty darn well, might I add. Except when he prepares to obliviate Jacob in the beginning. He doesn't explain that at all. Does he have trouble with social norms? Does he not understand how things work? Well, there are a couple of examples of when Newt seems to have trouble focusing on the social interaction he's in, or has trouble making eye contact and such. But I think those can be easily explained. I mean, he was kind of preoccupied by his niffler, queening being awkward, and he was alone with his future wife. That will be enough to make anyone a little uneasy. Also, remember when he says, "You do understand they will obliviate you in a heartbeat." I think he understands things perfectly. He just doesn't quite agree with it and does his own thing. He also doesn't seem to have any problems with sensory experiences. A lot of autistic people have trouble because they are very sensitive to auditory, visual, and other stimuli, because it's difficult to filter it out. The point is that Newt doesn't seem to have any problems with that at all. Of course, he's not a kid, and as you get older, you get more used to stimuli, and you learn to hide the sensitivity that is still there. But he does have that one specific interest, right? Magizoology. Newt definitely seems to prefer animals over humans. Newt himself actually says that he annoys people. And there is precedence for this in the world of autism. Chris Packham, for example, is a TV presenter and animals expert. He's basically a real-life Newt Scamander. Well, a real-life muggle Newt Scamander. and he's autistic. So it would make sense for Newt to also be autistic. I mean, it is possible. Many people with autism are very capable of integrating into normal people's society. So it's definitely possible that Newt is one of those autistic people that just don't seem that autistic, or that he got pretty good at hiding it. He does have his own way of thinking, like the idea to use Frank and the venom to obliviate the whole of New York, or comparing Tina's eyes to salamanders, or the middle head expression. They are special. It's a testament to Newt's specific passion for magical creatures and how deeply that is ingrained in his being. But it doesn't mean he's autistic. He might as well just be a passionate magizoology fan. I don't see enough evidence to really call it just yet. From what I see, it's just as likely that he might not be autistic at all. So I guess the real question is, would he get a diagnosis? Well, turns out a diagnosis is supposed to be given by a multidisciplinary team of professionals, or at the very least, like a professional psychiatrist or something. And you'll notice that I'm none of that. So obviously, this isn't gonna be by the book. But I'd still like to see, to the best of my abilities, whether or not Newt has any chance to get a diagnosis. Now, the actual diagnosing is usually based not just on a person's present state, but also on one's childhood. Why is that? Because as we grow up, the signs and symptoms of autism might get so subtle that the professional who's supposed to be doing the diagnosing can't really see them. Because as kids, things are more obvious, but they get more internalized as we grow up. That's why it's important to also look at what you were like as a kid. So we'd have to see what Newt was like as a kid. Well, at the moment, there's only 2 Fantastic Beasts films out. And in these 4.5 hours or so, we only get to see 5 minutes of young Newt, if that. It's not a lot, but for now, it's all we have. So let's have a look. By my not so professional judgment, young Newt definitely looks much more autistic than his grown-up self. He does have more trouble making eye contact. He is very focused on the bird he's caring for, in a similar way that an autistic person might be focusing on the thing they're passionate about. He also fears having to work an office job, which seems weird at first, but if your monofocus or passion is fantastical beasts, not getting to do that and having to work in a dull office job is not a weird thing to come up with as your worst fear. But still, autism is one explanation for this, but he might have just been a shy kid. At this moment, there's just not enough data to really make any sort of call on this. I mean, less than 5 minutes is not nearly enough to diagnose for autism, you guys. But a diagnosis is not reached just by talking to the patient. There are actual tools that are used by professionals to get a good image of the patient and to reach a proper conclusion. These tools are like questionnaires and tests like that they fill in for or with the patient to get a better idea of this person's personality. So I found one of those tests and I tried to fill it in for Newt as we see him in the films, to the best of my abilities. Question 1. I prefer to do things with others rather than on my own. Well, Newt sure seems to prefer to work alone, but he also doesn't mind working with people, depending on who they are. He likes Jacob and the Goldsteins, which is an awesome band name by the way, but he doesn't like Theseus. So I'm gonna say slightly disagree. I prefer to do things the same way over and over again. I don't get that impression from Newt, so I'm gonna say definitely disagree. If I try to imagine something, I find it very easy to create a picture in my mind. What? I don't know. I mean, he wrote FBAW TFT, so I guess so. Definitely agree. I frequently get so strongly absorbed in one thing that I lose sight of other things. Well, he does get pretty absorbed by stuff, but I don't get the impression that it is to the point that he forgets everything else. Slightly agree. And that gives us a so-called autism spectrum quotient of 30 out of 50, which is apparently just below the cutoff point for individuals with clinically significant levels of autistic traits. But keep in mind that this is a quantification of something that can't properly be quantified, and isn't supposed to be quantified either, based to some degree on the personal interpretation by some guy on the internet who is definitely not a multidisciplinary team or a professional psychiatrist of a fictional character. So it's probably not entirely accurate, nor does it really matter because the guy's not even real. So I think it's about bleeping time to form some sort of conclusion. Based on everything I've just been saying, I think it's very clear that there are traits that are associated with autism, so it makes sense that people would think that he's autistic. But based on what we've got to see so far, I don't think he would actually get a diagnosis. So, strictly speaking, I guess that means he's not autistic. He certainly has autistic traits though, so if you want to interpret him as autistic, go for it, because he might very well be. I know that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna leave you with a question again. So Newt may or may not be autistic, but what about his granddaughter-in-law, Luna Lovegood? Or his wife, Tina? Are there any other characters that I'm forgetting about who might be autistic? Let me know down below. Time for the YouTube thing? Time for the YouTube thing. You know the drill. Comment, like, subscribe, share the bell, etc. Thanks for watching.